Do you feel frustrated trying to grow your franchise? Are you having trouble balancing your consumer and franchise development marketing? Do you wish there was an easier way? Imagine if you had a proven roadmap to take your franchise's marketing from costing you to making you money. That's why we've created the Franchise Growth Blueprint. We walk you through the exact same process that we use to run franchise marketing campaigns for our clients at scale that has resulted in triple-digit growth. This blueprint isn't for anyone. It's not for people just starting a franchise. It's not for franchises without long-term goals. This is for franchises that want to scale up their marketing in a predictable and profitable way using a proven roadmap. If you want to sell more franchises, keep your current franchisees happy, and learn from people who have already done it, go to franchisegrowthblueprint.com and sign up today. That's franchisegrowthblueprint.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of the Franchise Marketing Podcast. Today, I have Clark Harrop from Dale Lessmann LLP. Clark, welcome.
Hey, Jordan. How you doing? Great to see you, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. So for those who don't know you, what exactly do you do in the franchising space?
Well, I'm a franchising lawyer, and for someone like myself who's been doing it for a couple decades, I guess I understand what that means. Although I usually have to explain to clients and certainly to friends and strangers what do I mean when I say I'm a franchising lawyer. I work with franchisors, and I work with them not just in terms of setting up their franchising programs and making sure that their contracts, so the franchise agreement and the franchise disclosure document, complies with law and gives them the rights and the tools that any good franchise system needs in order to operate. But also I deal with franchisors across kind of a broad range of issues regarding supply chain, marketing, occasionally dealing with with the people side of things in terms of employment law, but primarily my big focus is on the interpretation of those franchise agreements and talking to franchisees and franchisors about the relationship between franchisors and franchisees. So the majority of my clients are franchisors, although I have from time to time acted for franchisees. So I've been on both sides of the equation. And I think in that time, I've worked across a range of franchise systems, different industries. And, I think I have certainly my own idea in terms of what makes a strong franchise system and how that relationship works most effectively.
Yeah, I'm sure you get some like a very different and interesting viewpoint. So let's unpack that more. From what you've seen, what really makes a strong system on the franchise side?
I think a strong system is characterized by, I'm going to say, communication and collaboration. Those are the two words that I always come back to. And when I'm working with, it doesn't matter whether I'm working with franchisors or franchisees, a lot of the questions I try and get to is to understand how that relationship is working right now, how much communication there is, how much collaboration there is, how much openness and willingness there is to, I'm going to say, first, be transparent, to share information with the other side, and to try and find solutions that work collaboratively for the benefit of both franchisors and franchisees. My experience has been that when franchising relationships are breaking down, it is usually because the communication has become unproductive, the collaboration has ceased, and both sides become very self-interested and are looking at business problems, because at the heart of this is always business problems. Like, is there enough sales? Is the pie big enough to, for both the franchisor and franchisee to make reasonable rates of return? It's when there's that sense that the pie isn't growing and people become very protective and they become very closed off and they stop working together on how to solve these problems and start working towards how do I get the most for myself? How do I protect myself? And so the systems that are great and are ones that have those kind of open, collaborative relationships.
That's very interesting and something that I hear quite a bit talking with other franchisors in the space. So I'm curious, how do you ensure that communication is always transparent and really productive over the long term?
I think, and again, I'll kind of go to the kind of advice and the type of work that I've done with, predominantly my franchisor clients, because I think it starts with the franchisor, right? I mean, at the end of the day, franchisees, they have less control over the relationship and over the evolution of that relationship. The franchisees look to the franchisor to kind of establish that framework of communication. And so the kind of questions that I ask franchisors are like, how are you communicating with franchisees currently? How are you listening? Like, are you simply going to their locations or talking to them on the phone? Do you have a regular recurring cycle of, franchisee meetings? Do you have, what are the venues of communication that you currently have in place? And are they sporadic or irregular? Like, I talk to my franchisees when I happen to see them or when they call me, versus do you have proactive, like formalized methods of communication and venues for communication? And it can be, in the age of pandemic, and it used to be in-person meetings was one of them, but in the age of the pandemic and COVID, do you have regular Zoom calls? Do you have regular conference calls? Do you have newsletters and other forms of communication? Do you send regular updates to your franchisees? How often are you communicating what you're doing and what you're seeing as a franchisor, and how you're seeing whatever the current business conditions are? How are they impacting different franchisees, and what are you doing to address business conditions? And when it starts to fall apart, because franchisees feel like they've been abandoned, that they've been left on their own, because they're not getting that. They're not getting the feedback. They're not getting the communication and the support that they feel that they bought into, that they were expecting.
Totally. And I love that point about being proactive rather than reactive to situations. So I'm curious, on the flip side, have you ever seen scenarios that have backfired where a franchisor is maybe too transparent with their Z's?
Well, I think where franchisors have, and I have seen this, where franchisors have perhaps shown a little too much of the roadmap, or communicated and set expectations which were not realistic, and whether they were not realistic because they failed to take into account changing market dynamics, or they made promises regarding the relative success and impact that certain programs were going to have, or they talked about expected rates of return for investments that may not have been, ultimately borne out. I think, like all relationships, franchisors can get themselves into trouble if they communicate things that with a level of certainty that they should not have, when they don't provide all the information, and then when they kind of fail to correct and course correct, as they start to see things unfold. And so it's like any relationship. This is all, it's all basics of human dynamics. It's no different from when I communicate with my wife. If I set expectations and I don't course correct and change those expectations or modify them, then I can very easily find myself, as a franchisor can, now having to really solve a bigger problem, because it now seems like I've been disingenuous or I have misled, and my intentions may have been great and honorable throughout. Everything I might be doing as a franchisor might be with the best of intentions of doing things for the benefit of the system, but miscommunicating and then failing to correct it can be as dangerous as not communicating at all. So you're trying to find the right balance of what to say, how often to communicate, and how to be realistic, like how to not overpromise and to set realistic expectations, recognizing that if you set realistic expectations, it's easier then for you to communicate with franchisees about, well, what are the problems that we have to solve together, right? Like, don't tell them that you're going to solve all the problems. Kind of work out how the franchisee comes to the table to assist in the solution.
And you know what? That's a great point. And it refers back to your other one about collaboration, right? It's kind of shifting that mindset of, franchisor versus franchisee, when in reality it's the two together versus a problem, tackling it in a very collaborative manner. So switching gears a little, you mentioned you work a lot on the franchise agreement and then franchise disclosure documents. So what have you seen, especially when franchisors are just starting out, some of the biggest mistakes that they make, aside from the communication collaboration side?
Yeah, I think for a new and a new franchisor, and I'm working with a lot more, startup franchisors or early stage franchisors who are very ambitious, but are not yet ready to scale up. Some of the challenges that they have is they have a limited body of knowledge going in. I mean, when somebody who may have been a successful entrepreneur, who might have a great concept and may have run, maybe multiple units or multiple territories with this concept, decides to become a franchisor, they still have a relatively limited body of knowledge in terms of they're not aware how the market is going to receive this outside of the territories that they currently operate in. And again, so, for better or for worse, a new startup franchisor is obligated to provide certain information, and some of that information, they don't have the same 20-year track record or the same experience from 100 units. They might have 3 units that have been operating for a 5-year period. And that means that they've got a more limited pool of information to draw from to kind of provide franchisees with the information that needs to go in that disclosure document. And it's a real challenge to, again, try and strike a balance for a new franchisor to decide, well, what is it that you can say justifiably is like, this is the information I have today. It's the best information I have, and I think it's the information that you need to make an informed decision, while at the same time you're not overpromising. Because when you overpromise, you essentially become a guarantor of the outcome. You guarantee to the franchisee when you say you will experience sales growth of X percent. I mean, so very clearly, I typically advise people not to make promises. I mean, I think similar to how it's important for the relationship to listen to franchisees, it's also very important when you're disclosing, when you're telling your story to a prospective franchisee, to ensure that there is always risk in an investment decision. And when a franchisee buys a franchise, even if they're buying the best known franchise in the world, there is still no guarantee of success, and there's still a risk of failure. And so franchisees need to make informed decisions. So it's really about remembering that your role as a franchisor is to provide them with all the facts they need to make an informed decision, but not to tell them what the future is going to be. Let them decide for themselves. Let them understand the risk and make an informed decision. Don't just try and tell them, oh, don't worry about that. Like, sales are growing hugely, and we're going to have great new product introductions, and here's the margin that you're going to experience. Those are the kind of things that the franchisor is not a prognosticator. They don't have perfect vision of what's going to happen in the future. All a franchisor can and should do is to say, this is the history. Maybe this is the sales history for the locations that we have. This is some knowledge that we have around what the cost of sales are, the cost of goods sold. And so you can understand the gross margins, and then you are going to need to take that information and build out your own projection. You're going to need to determine for yourself, can you make a successful go in the market that you want to operate in? And let them make that informed decision. And again, the best franchises are the ones that provide the right information so that a franchisee can make an informed decision, and at the same time require the franchisee to make an informed decision. Like, don't let them off the hook. They're coming to the table. They've got a role to play too, which is to evaluate the opportunity, to think long and hard about, do they have the skill set, the ambition, the fire in the belly, and the willingness to dedicate, their energy to make it a success. They have to do that soul searching themselves. So don't try and coax people into it. Don't be so hot for a sale that you don't let them work through those issues. It's better to let them have those honest conversations with themselves, and know what they're getting into.
And it aligns, again, very much with other conversations that I've had with franchisors, in that you kind of want to be a little picky and make it a little difficult for new people to come into the system. That way, you're getting someone who's going to be, kind of going to be sticky with you and be there with you through the thick and the thin of things
Mm-hmm.
as you scale your system. So you brought up a great point about, initial franchisors not having a lot of historical data. So would you recommend systems just starting out to maybe, have at least 3 or 4 or 5 corporate stores before even thinking of franchising? Like, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, are there times where it's not good to franchise and you should kind of remain corporate for a bit? We'll get right back to the show, but do you feel frustrated trying to grow your franchise? Are you having trouble balancing your consumer and franchise development marketing? Do you wish there was an easier way? Imagine if you had a roadmap to take your franchise's marketing from costing you to making you money. That's why we've created the Franchise Growth Blueprint. To find out more, visit franchisegrowthblueprint.com. That's franchisegrowthblueprint.com. Now back to today's episode.
I think before you go franchising, before you start, going out into the world and selling prospective franchisees on this investment, I think you need to understand for yourself what that investment looks like. And again, unless you've operated for long enough and or opened enough units that you can understand that there are differences, that not every location will perform like a superstar, that there are variations in terms of sales, variations just in terms of, between the markets in terms of how you market into those, how competitive those markets are. Mm-hmm. It's not really possible to appreciate those dynamics unless you operate for a period of time and with a certain number of units. And so when I ask, a potential startup franchisor, like help me understand your model. Like if at the end of the day, a business produces a pie, less expenses, potential profit, and then how are we going to split that pie? What's the split of the pie between the franchisor and the franchisee? What is your target rate of return as a franchisor? And what should the target rate of return for a franchisee be? When I'm having those conversations with them, it becomes apparent whether they have enough experience through their own operations to be able to talk confidently that they understand what that pie is going to look like and how much of the pie goes to the franchisor and how much is going to go to the franchisee, and whether the franchisee, whether there really is a viable, sustainable business that's going to be financially successful for the franchisee. I think at the end of the day, that is the test. Is don't be a franchisor unless and until you're confident that you're going to get a rate of return and you're going to get income out of this franchise model that allows you to do what you have to do as a franchisor, which is protect the system, grow the system, evolve the system, and develop it, and support your franchisees so that they run successful businesses and produces that rate of return for the franchisees. They can run successful, profitable businesses. So unless you've got to the experience point where you can do that, I'd say maybe it's premature. Maybe you either have no business franchising or you have no business franchising today. Mm-hmm. And I have franchise clients, franchisors, who have got there with 3 units, who have got there with 2 units, who have operated 5 units, and who have operated from anywhere from, 3 years to 10 years. So it kind of ranges. I'm not sure that there's a hard and fast rule, but it does, if you were to have a rule of thumb, I've heard it said that 3 units in 3 years is kind of the bare minimum to really know that you've got something that's scalable.
Mm-hmm. It makes a lot of sense. That definitely makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious. You're working right now with a lot of startup franchises, and you've worked on the big enterprise side. So I'm curious, how has FDDs and franchise agreements kind of changed from that startup side to as you grow and scale as a system?
In some ways, and this goes back to my background, because I started in franchising in 2000 when I joined Tim Hortons as in-house counsel, and I spent 13 years with Tim's doing their FDD in Canada and doing their FDD in the US, and then moved to McDonald's and spent 6 years with McDonald's. large franchisors like a Tim's, like a McDonald's,
Mm-hmm.
in some ways have an easier time because the brand and the concept is better known,
Mm-hmm.
and the businesses are mature enough that it's easier for a franchisor to think, what is a piece of information that a franchisee needs to make an informed purchasing decision when they're going to buy a franchise.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to imagine. I mean, um, there's not too many pieces of information that are outside of the, I'm going to say, the prescribed material facts that franchisors are required to disclose under the legislation and regulation, and and we're talking about the 6 provinces that have disclosure laws. That's BC, Alberta, Manitoba, Ontario, New Brunswick, and PEI. All 6 of those provinces kind of define what at minimum you need to disclose. It's hard to imagine with a big system what else could be out there that a franchisee could say, well, I wouldn't have bought if I had known that. I mean, generally speaking, if you have an opportunity to buy a Taco Bell, it's a huge established brand. It's right around the world. What else would you expect to know? Whereas the small startup franchisors, sometimes it's kind of hard to know what is a piece of information that could be relevant to a small startup system and to a prospective franchisee who is buying into, I'm going to say, taking a flyer on a less established franchisor without that kind of huge track record and the big national brand presence and the marketing dollars behind it. It is a bit more of a flyer. And, so we have to have deeper conversations actually about what is it that they need to know to make an informed decision? What is it that, the franchisor knows about what's going to happen? And in that case, in a smaller system, a pivot to a new business line or introduction of new products or a change around technology has greater risk and maybe greater danger for a prospective franchisee. And so the kind of thing that in systems are kind of taken for granted, that there's evolution and there's new products. In smaller systems, you have to kind of think about what's coming down the pipe, what is known, because that could very much impact somebody's decision.
Totally, totally. And you mentioned pivot. So with this whole COVID-19 crisis that has been going on, I'm sure you've seen some very interesting pivots within the clients that you're working with on the legal side. So I'm curious as to how you've been experiencing COVID-19 on the franchise side.
Well, it's been a very interesting and fast-moving and demanding sort of 6 months so far, and I can't believe we're already 6 months into it. And I'm sure that when we all went into lockdown in early to mid March, I can't imagine that anyone foresaw that 6 months later we'd still be in the midst of it and anticipating that it's going to carry on for another 6 or 12 months or longer. Those pivots immediately began. I mean, right out of the gate. When the emergency orders came out, the states of emergency were declared, and retail businesses were for the most part completely closed. Obviously, all businesses, all franchises that involved physical premises locations, had to deal with complete shutdowns. And then there was a very tight list initially of the essential businesses which were exempted from that order. Mm-hmm. And I remember fielding countless calls from different franchises saying, "Do I fit on that list? Like, here's what I do. How do I fit on that list?" And so food businesses, restaurant businesses that relied solely on delivery and takeout, were very quickly on that list. And so we had to find ways to assist them and look at their franchise agreements, but more it was issues of how do we look at marketing and supply chain to make sure that what do we need to do to right size the employee base if we're only going to be operating just takeout delivery? Are we letting people go? The number of issues to very quickly be able to move into a world where restaurants could do just takeout and delivery. Or looking at all these other businesses. I mean, I represent franchise systems in landscaping, is landscaping, is lawn mowing, or snow shoveling, are these essential businesses? These are the kind of things we went through. We looked at, personal services businesses and how it would impact hair salons, nail salons, massage parlors, other franchise businesses in that kind of spa space. Had to look at, the range of home-based businesses as to could they operate, how could they operate, places, home-based businesses in particular that were very much based on doing impersonal consultations, going out and actually meeting the customer in their home, providing services in the home, had to very quickly pivot and say, can I do this remotely in a connected manner? And the number of franchisors I work with who used Zoom or Microsoft Teams or WebEx or Skype or something similar to be able to allow them to do, distanced in-person meetings, and to kind of have to look at how they could deliver their services, deliver their products entirely remotely, led to a huge number of pivots that required us to look at franchise agreements and supplier agreements and marketing contracts, and in some cases set up delivery and logistics for home deliveries and installations that, previously that wasn't the business model. In most cases, people had anywhere from sort of 2 to 6 to 8 weeks to do this kind of hard pivot. What I'm really happy to say is that those businesses that did it, that really attacked this early, by and large, have been successful with their pivots and are surviving, and in some cases thriving in this pandemic. Those that kind of sat on the sideline and just figured, like, I'll just turn the light switch off, I'll shut the door, and I'll come back when things reopen, thinking that it would only be a 2 or 3 week shutdown. In some cases, they've sort of found themselves now, they're yesterday's news, they're forgotten about, and it's really hard to turn things back on. And as a franchise system, a franchisor that just chose to turn the lights off and kind of not help their franchisee find a way to pivot to a new, COVID-approved model. I can only think that they must have damaged their relationship with their franchisees significantly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you know what? It goes back to your communication and collaboration points that you made right at the start of this conversation. I love it. It's coming full circle.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, like you see the value and the importance of those things in times of stress. And I can't think in 20 years I have been through, I've been through recessions. I have been through, times where the Canadian dollar has gone from above par and, $1.07 US to the Canadian dollar to 63 cents or 61 cents to the Canadian dollar, where supply chains have been, completely had to be re-engineered based on currency fluctuations. I've seen all kinds of different kinds of disruptions and uncertainties, both economic and political and social, and I have never seen anything like this. It's a global pandemic. It's affecting all businesses, all industries, all sectors, all countries. So those businesses that do survive should absolutely, kind of take a bow, because this has been an incredibly hard environment in which to just, keep going in.
Totally. It truly tests your entrepreneurial spirit, if you will. So, Clark, one question I always like to ask, and we kind of touched on this already, but what advice would you give someone just starting out as a franchisor?
Just starting out as a franchisor?
Mm-hmm.
My advice is usually around selection of franchisees, because for startups, the success, what's going to make or break your franchise system is the quality of your franchisees. As a early stage franchisor, it is incredibly important to focus on culture, the culture of your own organization, and making sure that your franchisees, they don't just have a pulse. They don't just have, two pennies to rub together. That they are so aligned and similar in terms of how they think culturally, that they feel the same level of passion and ownership about your business, and pick people who, franchisees don't need to be lifelong friends of a franchisor, but in the early stage, it really helps if you're picking people that you would go to battle with, that you would be in the trenches with day in and day out for the next 10 years, because that's how long it takes an early stage franchisor to graduate to that high scale, high growth, well-known regional or national system. It does not happen overnight. There are things you can do to accelerate it, working with the right consultants to perfect your model, working with the right marketers to build your brand presence can accelerate growth. But at the end of the day, the ability of a franchise system to grow is really based on your ability to recruit those great franchisees, to build solid relationships so that when the tough times come, and they will, every franchisee struggles in the first couple of years, and every franchise system, even if it's launched in the most opportune economic circumstances, within their early years, you'll go through a recession, you'll go through maybe a global pandemic. So franchisee selection is everything. Knowing not just what the hard criteria is in terms of, how much money do they need to have? How many years of experience do they need to have in an industry? What are the particular, I'm going to say aptitudes or skill set that shows up on a CV or a resume? Not just that they have that, but really get to know them as people and to understand what the culture of your organization is and who are the people that fit with it, who are the people that are going to believe in your mission. I mean, one of the things I'm saying is a franchisor needs to act with mission, right? Like a franchisor it can't just be a business. It has to be a passion. It has to be a mission that's based on shared values. And it has to be able to convey that, attract the right people. I've sometimes heard it said that franchise systems are a bit like, they're a bit like tribes. They're a bit like cults. Maybe that's a weird word to use, but it's that idea of, you are people who share this idea of what the future could be, share this idea in terms of that there is a problem, that this is the right, whether it is because this is the best food or this is the best service or product, but that you are going to change the world. You're going to change people's lives. You want those people working for you. You want those people to be your franchisees. And without that, when the tough times come, people will start to head for the exits, and you'll be so tied up in knots just trying to solve for how do you backfill the people who are leaving, that your plans of growth and scaling up will get shelved and put to the side. And it can, in some cases, be the death of an otherwise healthy franchise system.
Wow, I love the advice and how deep you went into it. So we're coming up to the end of the episode, Clark, and I like to end all of them with something that I call the lightning round. Okay. So just some fast-paced questions going at you. Don't worry, okay. No toughies.
Okay, super quick. Fire away.
Yeah. So first question is, what is your favorite tool or app that you cannot live without?
Well, I mean, it's email, because I'm on email 24/7.
What is your favorite book?
My favorite book, it's called the Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande. It is essential reading for anyone running a business, because it's all about reducing error and about creating something that's scalable so that you can entrust other people to do what you would do yourself. And it allows you to create bandwidth and spread yourself thinner and actually just really go after that addressable market.
Great book. Last question is, where can people find out more about you and your company?
That would be DaleLessmann.com. And I'd certainly invite people to check out my website at DaleLessmann.com that has my blog. And I do kind of blog semi-frequently about issues regarding franchising. And I've got entries on, in terms of the SECRA, the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program, on some of the changes that just came down in the regulations to the Arthur Wishart Act. That's the Franchising Act in Ontario. So certainly invite people to follow me on LinkedIn too, because all of my articles and musings about franchising, including kind of shared posts from my friends in industry, that's where you'll find that.
Awesome. Clark, thank you so much for coming on.
Jordan, thanks for having me. This was fun.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Franchise Marketing Podcast. If you found this episode useful, share it with a friend and subscribe now so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. And until then, happy marketing.